Welcome back everybody, my name is Tucker and today I'm continuing the series in which I try and build different rosters in 2K19 that you guys want to see and then run them through a simulation. Today's suggestion comes from the comment section of the last video, and that is to build the best team I can with all undrafted players. There were a ton of suggestions in the comment section of the last video and I really appreciate that, and I hope you guys continue to do that, but this is the one that definitely caught my attention first. Just a reminder, in case this is the first time you're seeing one of these videos, there are a couple of rules that I have to follow. First, I'm building a 14-man roster, and second, I have to put together an actual NBA team, which means I have 2 players at each of the positions, and then another 4 players that can be any position that I want. And then as I said, once I have everything put together, I put it into NBA 2K19 and we run it through a season in my league and see how many wins we can get. With all that said, I do have a couple of guys in mind, so let's go ahead and get into the rosters and start putting together the team. The last couple of times that I've done this, I've kind of gone through by position, but instead, I'm just going to go through the starting lineup and then go through the bench. So to start that off with our first point guard, it's going to be Fred VanVleet. As you can see, he's a 77 overall after going undrafted out of Wichita State a few years ago and just signed a pretty good deal this summer. He should be able to defend extremely well, should be able to shoot very well, and be a pretty good playmaker as well. Now, 77 overall is not great, but this is not going to be a team filled with stars anyway. But in terms of a guy that is going to do a few things very, very well, Fred VanVleet definitely fits the bill and is a good start for this team. Next up at the starting shooting guard spot is going to be Wesley Matthews. Now, he is an undrafted free agent out of Marquette originally and bounced around to a couple of different teams and finally found a home in Dallas. As you can see, he's a 77 overall. Another guy that's going to be able to guard fairly well, that's going to be able to shoot the 3, and even though his mobility is limited after tearing his Achilles not too long ago, he's still the best option at the 2-guard spot for me. Next up at the small forward spot, we have probably the best player on the roster, and that is Joe Ingles. As you can see, he's a 79 overall, should be able to shoot the ball extremely well, is a really good playmaker, especially at a technically small forward spot, and should definitely provide the team with plenty of offense. And even in the postseason last year against guys like Paul George, he showed himself very well on the defensive end, despite not being the most athletic guy in the league. So he's definitely a good addition to the undrafted team. Next up at the power forward spot is going to be JaMychal Green of the Memphis Grizzlies. Now, as you can see, he's a 75 overall, and something that I've found as I'm going through this is that it's pretty difficult to find good undrafted free agents at the power forward spot. So the other guy that I have at this spot, as you'll see later, isn't very good, but I needed to fulfill the requirements of having 2 guys at each position. Green is a pretty solid player, not a great shooter, not really great at anything, but he's a solid player at the 4 spot, should be able to rebound fairly well, should be able to defend fairly well, and has a little bit of an offensive game. Now, as you'll see as we go through this lineup, I could throw in a guy that's technically a 3 at the 4 spot to go a little bit smaller and not have Green out there because he's not a great shooter, but just to stay true to the positional aspects of this challenge, I wanted to put him in the starting lineup. And last up in the starting lineup at the center spot is going to be Dewayne Dedmon. As you can see, he's a 77 overall. He actually is a fairly good shooter. I've played against him a few times in 2K, and he actually makes a good amount of outside shots. He's a strong inside defender, good rebounder, and should be pretty much everything we need at the 5 spot. When you look at the starting lineup as a whole, it's not a great group, like I said, in terms of star power, but we're off to a pretty good start in terms of guys that are good at a handful of things, and we've got plenty of shooting, so that's definitely something that I'm going to want. As we move to the bench, you'll start to see that this is a team that doesn't really have a ton of drop-off from the starters to the bench, so you could really plug and play and put in whoever you want into the starting lineup off the bench if you wanted to in your own personal team. But moving on now to the first spot off the bench, and that's going to be Robert Covington, a 79 overall, and a guy that just signed a fairly sizable contract as well. He's very much a 3-and-D player. He's going to be able to guard very well on the defensive end. He's going to be a solid shooter, although he'd had plenty of struggles in the postseason last year. He's a guy that's been a pretty good high volume and high efficiency 3-point shooter since he's been in the league, although his percentage could be better. He's definitely a good guy to have in this spot off the bench. Next up, we have Kent Bazemore, who's a 77 overall and has a pretty sizable contract himself. Now, you could obviously make the case that he should be in the starting lineup over Wesley Matthews, but that's not really the point. Again, you can plug and play with any of these guys. And once again, Bazemore is someone that's going to be able to shoot. He's going to be able to defend and has actually improved as a playmaker since he signed that big deal because, well, he had to be worth that much money, even though he probably still isn't worth that much money. He's definitely a better playmaker than I feel like some people know. He's not going to do anything spectacular, but again, he's going to be able to make shots. He's going to be able to guard, make a few plays, and that's a good option to have off the bench. Next up, we have another perimeter player, and that is Jonathan Simmons at a 77 overall. This is a guy that obviously made his name with the Spurs and then signed a pretty sizable contract with the Magic a few summers ago. He's a pretty good athlete, should be able to get to the rim, attack well in transition, and defend pretty well, as well as knocking down some three-point shots. So that's always a good addition to the team, even though once again, he's not exactly a star or someone that's going to be able to carry us on the offensive end. Next up, we have our second center on the roster, and that is Salah Mejri of the Dallas Mavericks. He's a 76 overall, and is basically going to be someone that takes up a good amount of space inside, tries to protect the rim as well as he can, and is a great rebounder on both sides of the ball. He'll be a pretty good finisher on occasion inside, but mostly he's a guy that's going to play well defensively and rebound the ball and let everybody else do what they do best. Next up, we have our second point guard, and that is also a member of the Dallas Mavericks, and that is Barea. Even though he's now 34 years old, he seems to just always be around and always be playing well for whatever team he's on, as illustrated by his 76 overall in 2K19. He's definitely improved as a three-point shooter since his time with that title-winning Dallas Mavericks team a few years ago, and is obviously going to be a very good playmaker, and he has plenty of experience being on the floor with other point guards, which is something that you might be able to experiment with this group. So in the end, even though there were a handful of other guys that I could have picked at the point guard spot, Barea is going to be the first one off the bench here. Next up is another big man, and that is Aron Baynes of the Boston Celtics, a 75 overall, a guy that's going to rebound very well, is going to be very good defensively, hit an occasional mid-range shot, and even in the playoffs last year, made an occasional three-point shot as well, but he's not going to do anything spectacular. He's just going to play hard, he's going to do his job, and he's going to do all the little things that this team is going to need, because once again, not a lot of star power on the roster, so all those little things are going to be needed to try and win as many games as possible. Winding down the bench now, we have another point guard, and that is Quinn Cook of the Golden State Warriors at a 74 overall. This is a guy that a lot of you probably did see coming after his rise up into the Warriors roster last season. What I really like about this pick is obviously he can shoot the ball, he can make plays, but he can also play at really the 1 or the 2. Obviously he's listed as a point guard, but he can play at either of those positions, whether it be alongside VanVleet or Barea or whoever, and that kind of versatility is definitely going to be important to this team. Perimeter defense and athleticism are definitely going to be issues for him, but in the end, I really wanted to have him on this roster for that offensive versatility and obviously his shooting ability. Second to last now, we have another member of the Utah Jazz, and that is Royce O'Neale at a 74 overall. He actually got a good amount of run last year for the Jazz, and this is a rating that I would not be surprised to see increase as the season goes along, because he actually showed himself fairly well. He's got pretty good size and length, should be able to shoot the ball, should be able to defend and rebound pretty well out of the 3 spot, and maybe even play the 2 in certain lineups. Last up is going to be Lance Thomas at a 69 overall. Now, the reason he's on this roster is because I'm cheating a little bit. It says that he's listed as a small forward. In my mind, he's definitely much more of a power forward, and there weren't really a ton of other options in terms of undrafted power forward. So I'm going to put him there to make sure that we fulfill that 2 power forward requirement. And again, even though I am cheating a little bit positionally, it's not that big of a deal, and that will round out our 14-man lineup. So with that all done now, I'm going to put these guys on a roster and we're going to run them through a simulation in 2K19. All right, here we are now in my league, and as you can see, I put the team together, and this is the rotation. Just like I said, VanVleet at the 1, Matthews at the 2, then Ingles, Green, and Dedmon, followed by all these guys off the bench. Now, as I said, this is a pretty solid team, but I don't have high expectations because we just don't have a ton of star power. But as you guys know, 2K Sims can be very, very strange this year, so we might end up making the playoffs, we might end up winning 4 games, I don't know, but I'm interested to see, so let's go ahead and get into it. So at the All-Star break, things are not good. We have the 3rd worst record in the West, somehow better than Portland and Memphis, who are both absolutely awful. At 20-37 at the All-Star break, that's already better than the worst possible team over the luxury tax team that I did last time, but the goal here was to be good, so 20-37 is not great. Taking a look at the stats, we have Kent Bazemore leading the team in scoring off the bench, and as you can see, and as probably expected, there's a lot of guys in double figures, very balanced scoring throughout the roster. We are unfortunately the lowest scoring team in the league and the only team in the league scoring under 100 points per game, despite being in the top 10 in both 3-point makes and 3-point attempts per game. And that's probably because we have the lowest field goal percentage in the entire league. So this has obviously not gone great, but let's just see how the rest of the season turns out. End of the year standings, 2nd worst record in the West, Still better than the Memphis Grizzlies, but still not great. End of season stats very much the same as they were before. Very balanced scoring, but no stars to really pick up the slack and be a 20-point per game guy. And no surprise, we are still the worst scoring team in the league. And there you have it, an NBA team created of entirely undrafted players is apparently not very good. 24-58 is not great, but this was still fun for me. I learned a lot about these guys who I knew about, but might not have necessarily known that they were undrafted, and this was actually a better team that got put together than I really anticipated it would be. I really enjoy doing these challenges, so if you guys have any others you would like for me to try, then be sure to comment them down below, and if I do use it, I'll definitely show your comment on screen. Once again, my name is Tucker. If you missed any of my previous videos, be sure to check out the boxes on screen, and I'll see you all next time.